No, I'm just saying in the future. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin, Council would like to ask Mayor Delaquila to join us at the dais as the head of our city. If you'll please take the seat up here. We would. Okay, we're going to acknowledge that Mayor Delaquila is present at this hearing. We are here this afternoon to conduct a removal hearing for a Planning Commission member, Thomas Jarris. As this hearing proceeds, we beg your patience since the council is not used to performing hearings such as this. Before we begin, we want to explain the sequence of events that have gotten us here today. On March 21st, 2016, Thomas Jarris was appointed by Mayor Delaquila to the Planning Commission and, pursuant to the city charter, received council confirmation of said appointment. Following the appointment, Mr. Jarris attended and participated in Planning Commission meetings. Planning Commission meeting minutes confirm this fact. On February 13th, 2017, Mayor Delaquila suspended Planning Commission member Thomas Jarris pending his resignation or removal, and based on reasons supplied to council by the law department, the mayor received council confirmation by motion of said suspension. Mr. Jarris requested a hearing on a petition for removal prepared by the law department and served upon him on March 9th, 2017. On March 27th, 2017, council passed and the mayor signed Resolution 6, 2017, establishing procedures for hearing of petition in response to respondent Thomas Jarris's request for a removal hearing. The recommendation of the city's law department was for all elected officials to cease any and all communication with Mr. Jarris and suspend him from the Planning Commission. Mayor Delaquila suspended Mr. Jarris and received unanimous confirmation of the suspension by motion from City Council. Under the city charter, Mr. Jarris then had the option to resign or request a removal hearing. And the city and this council has gone through considerable time, money, and effort to schedule and to hold this hearing per his request. The removal hearing was neither mandated nor requested by the mayor, any member of city council, nor the law department. I repeat, the removal hearing was not requested by any member of city council, including myself, nor the mayor, nor the law department. It is council's understanding that Mr. Jarris informed the city law department representative, Mr. DeChiro, 3 days prior to this requested removal hearing that he no longer wishes to have the removal hearing, but as a condition of withdrawing his request for a hearing, He is demanding certain actions from the city and this council. Those demands to city elected officials are generally public retractions related to his suspension and the rescinding of Resolution Number 6, 2017 from the city in return for withdrawing his removal hearing request. The City Council has not agreed to any of Mr. Jarris's demands that are within the purview of Council's jurisdiction. Upon the advice of Special Legal Counsel to the City, Mr. Todd Hunt, Council is proceeding with this removal hearing to establish the facts surrounding the suspension and causes for removal of Mr. Jarris, and to make a final decision with respect to the removal of Mr. Jarris as a member of the city's Planning Commission. Since the charges for suspension and removal were brought by the City of Seven Hills, and Mr. Jarris is contesting those charges, the city will have the burden of proof and will proceed first in this meeting. Mr. Hunt, the city's outside legal counsel, do you have any comments at this point?
I think the only comments are is that I'd like the parties to introduce themselves or their counsel to introduce themselves, and since the city has the burden of proof, to a preponderance, the evidence based on those charges, would they introduce themselves, counsel for the city?
Thank you. On behalf of the City of Seven Hills, Assistant Water Record Patrick Ventura, and my esteemed co-counsel, Michael Cicero.
And is Mr. Jarris or his counsel present?
Your Honor, the record reflect he was here earlier, and he's not present in the room in the hearing at this time.
Okay. Has anybody heard from him, from Mr. DeCiro, Mr. Cicero? Have you heard from him as to why he is not here, or he's refusing to attend, or what the circumstances are?
My only knowledge is he was standing outside, and it's third-party hearsay that he does not wish to participate. He has been served with all the documents, and he's elected at this time not to participate.
Mr. Pignatella.
Richard Pignatella, Water Record Seven Hills. Mr. Jarris approached me in the hallway, said he was not going to participate in this hearing as anything other than special expected. I don't know where he is at this moment, but that's what the whole thing.
Well, given the fact that he's not here, Mr. President, I would ask that you have the city proceed. I think they do need to at least put on some evidence, and it appears to have been adequate notice to Mr. Jarris of the hearing and the time, and that he was actually here at some point.
Well, I'm going to be able to. Yeah, I'm going to be able to.
At this point, I'll turn it over to Prosecutor DeCiro and Special Counsel Mike Cicero.
May it please the council, I have three preliminary matters. The first preliminary matter is a motion in limine, which, because Mr. Jarris is not here, it may not come into play. I don't know if he will come here later, if he will participate in later, but I want to keep that motion pending as long as this hearing proceeds. So that's number one. Number two, if Mr. Jarris does not participate, I anticipate that I could conclude in 1 hour and 15 minutes. But if I can't, and Mr. Jarris is not here, I would motion that I be allowed my additional 15 minutes rebuttal, which was provided pursuant to the rules prepared by Mr. Hunt, okay? And that I would ask that you hold in abeyance so when I get to my 1 hour and 15 minute mark. And okay. Mr. Hunt?
Well, before you get to point number three, I think it's incumbent upon the council president to determine whether to grant that last motion for the additional 15 minutes if you need that at the end of your presentation.
We'll determine that at that time.
Thank you, Mr. President. And then finally, I wanted, again, noted for the record that Mr. Jarris is not present. So there was nothing mentioned in the rules and as to an opening statement. So I would just like to proceed with my case and make a closing statement pursuant to the rules. Mr. Hunt, is that my understanding? There was no opening statement?
Well, opening statements would be permissible as part of your case, but I think it would be helpful to the council, even though they have a petition for removal, to perhaps read the charges.
That's
so
fine.
It's fresh in everyone's mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to read the charges directly from the petition, but I am going to tell you what I believe the charges are in a nutshell. May it please the City Council and the President, we are here to remove Mr. Jaros on a petition for removal. Pursuant to Article 3, Section 9B of our charter, it says by a vote of 5 of its members to expel or remove any appointee of a mayor from office for gross misconduct, malfeasance, nonfeasance, misfeasance, or for any other matter which would disqualify him from office. I believe that Mr. Jaros should be removed from office for gross misconduct, for misfeasance in office, and under our rules, it's any other matter which would disqualify him. And there are 2 other matters that disqualify him: conflict of interest and bias. As for the gross misconduct, just to give you a little bit of a nutshell, and I'll sum it up in closing, he has a conflict with an applicant in front of our Seven Hills Planning Commission, and he refuses to recuse himself. Number 2, concerning this developer applicant that's before the city, they have a pending application and he fails to recuse himself from all their pending business. He continually contacts city officials concerning their application, knowing that he has a conflict of interest. He has been interfering with this developer applicant's private contracts. Again, a tortious action on his behalf, and subjects the city to liability, and that is another element of the gross misconduct. And then he has not submitted a correct and complete payroll application to get paid to our city. Further gross misconduct. Then there's misfeasance in office. That is improperly doing your job. If you mop a floor and you don't put down some guards so people won't slip and fall on it, then you haven't done your job properly. In this case, his misfeasance is he's going out, doing his job on the planning commission, but he's failing to recuse himself from this case. And then on top of that, he's going out doing his best efforts to thwart and block this applicant. And by the way, the applicant is Tom Simich, Landsong Ltd. He's on a one-man mission to destroy them, block their application. Another cause for removal is any other matter. And there's 2 matters here: conflict of interest and biased. Number 1, he's biased. He has engaged in the last 6-7 years in an email and social media frenzy where he has attacked this developer, constantly attacked this developer, and then he wants to sit on our planning commission in judgment of this developer's application. Again, a clear bias, but it even goes one step further. He has sued this developer. Now, he hasn't sued him himself. He sued him as a board member of the Stone Ridge Maintenance Association. But what you will find is that the Stone Ridge Maintenance Association is Tom Jaros. He's going to all the hearings, all the depositions, answering all the interrogatories. He is intricately involved in this case. And I believe with a combination of my witnesses, you will see this bias and this conflict of interest. You will also see his misfeasance. And finally, you will see his gross misconduct. And at the end of this hearing, I will give you more details, but I prefer you listen to the evidence. And at the end of this hearing, I think you'll have no other alternative but to remove this man from our planning commission. And what I'm about to show you is pretty explosive because we have liability. And we have no other choice because this man will not heed the advice of council, planning commission members, or anybody else. He's got his own agenda, and we can't let this go anymore. Thank you. I'd like to call my first witness.
Please do.
For the record, may I please call Gary Werner. Gary, right up there. Take your pick.
Yep.
Gary, let me know when you're ready.
I think I'm ready.
You get to keep this square the witness. Todd, are you?
We'll have a court reporter do it. Thank you.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do.
For the record, will you please state your name and spell your last name?
My name is Gary Werner. Last name is Werner.
And Mr. Werner, what is your occupation?
I'm an attorney,
And how long have you been an attorney?
approximately 23 years.
Can you go through some of the highlights of your 22 years, your credentials as an attorney?
Sure. I was first admitted in California, practiced in Los Angeles area for approximately 4 years, moved back to Ohio, was admitted in Ohio, and have been practicing there ever since. I was involved in at least 3 different law firms here in Ohio since returning. That was in 1998. And some of the law firms no longer exist, but have been practicing in Beechwood, at Burns, Ochsner, and Greenberger for approximately the last 12 or 13 years, doing primarily land use and development.
Have you had any occasion to deal with municipalities?
I have. I'm actually a former Board of Zoning Appeals member in the city of Brunswick, where I served on that board for approximately 3.5 years. I was a city council member, both a ward member and an at-large member for approximately 5 years. 2 of those years I served as the vice mayor for the city council, and then I served 1 term as mayor in Brunswick as well for 4 years.
So it's fair to say you're pretty familiar with the operations of a city, is that correct?
I've been to a lot of meetings.
And do you know a Landsong LTD?
I do.
Do you also know a Tom Simich?
I do.
How do you know them?
Tom is a longtime client of not just our firm now, but he had worked extensively with one of my partners and myself at Con Kleiman before we left and created Burns, Ochsner, and Greenberger. I've known Tom for probably close to 15 years.
And are you assisting Mr. Simich or Landsong with a development called Glenn's Landing, which is located in the city of Seven Hills?
With regard to some aspects of that development, yes.
Okay, and that's a development on Rockside Road, am I correct?
Yes.
And as part of that development, your client, Landsong LTD, has submitted certain applications with the City of Seven Hills Planning Commission, is that correct?
Correct.
And you've had to appear in front of Planning Commission, am I correct?
He has had to appear before
Okay.
Planning Commission, correct?
And it's my understanding that there is a problem with one of our members, am I correct?
Yes.
And who is that member?
Tom Jaros.
Okay. And before we get any further, I believe you yourself has sent the City of Seven Hills 3 letters concerning the problems you have with Mr. Jaros. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to identify those letters.
Sure.
I'm handing you what's been marked Exhibit A. And let the record reflect, I didn't note it, but it is City's Exhibit A. You recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
This is a letter that I prepared on behalf of Landsong LTD and Glenn's Landing for the city relating to the issue of Mr. Jaros' participation on the Planning Commission for those projects.
Okay. And basically in this letter, it's dated July 26, 2016. You have some complaints about Mr. Jaros, am I correct?
Yes.
But before I go any further, I want to include all 3 of your letters so you could discuss all 3 of them. So let me hand you the last. Let the record reflect that first letter from July is Exhibit A, am I correct?
It is.
Now, I'm handing you what's been marked Exhibit B. Can you please speak? Okay. I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit B. Can you please identify that for the record?
Yes, Exhibit B is a December 7th, 2016 letter that I also composed on behalf of Glenn's Landing and Landsong Limited and sent to the Law Department here at the City of Seven Hills relating to the issue of Mr. Jarrell's participation on the Planning Commission for these projects.
And that letter again is dated
December 7th.
7th, 2016.
Correct.
And then there's one more. I'm handing you what's been marked as City's Exhibit C. Can you identify that for the record?
Yes, Exhibit C is a December 13th, 2016 letter that I composed to the Law Department at the City of Seven Hills, also on behalf of Glenn's Landing and Landsong, also relating to Mr. Jarrell's participation on the Planning Commission relative to their projects.
Now, all three of these letters were sent with your objection to Mr. Jarrell sitting on the Planning Commission as it relates to this application submitted by Landsong. Am I correct?
Correct.
And I think Exhibit B is probably the best one because Exhibit B, which is the second letter, the December 7th letter, has attached to it your July letter, and it has some exhibits. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk to you about some of those exhibits. You have an Exhibit B on the letter of December 7th, 2016. Can you tell me what the Exhibit B is?
Exhibit B to City Exhibit B?
Yes. Exhibit B to City Exhibit B.
Okay. Exhibit B to City Exhibit B is a collection of a few emails that were circulated, it appears, largely internally here at the City of Seven Hills to and from Mr. Jarrell relating to the Glenn's Landing development in the December 4th through December 6th, 2016 timeframe.
So basically, you've submitted those to establish what?
Well, this was a follow-up to the letter that we had originally sent, marked City Exhibit A. That was on July 26, 2016. And the evidence that we had attached to the July 26 letter was a selection, actually, of postings that Mr. Jarrell had placed on Cleveland.com and on Facebook over the time period between late 2014 through 2016, relating to other work and developments that Tom Simich and Landsong had done in the city, I'm sorry.
Can I stop you 1 minute,
Sure.
Mr. Werner? So if you're looking at Exhibit B, and you see there's an Exhibit A, which is the July 26th letter, and
Correct.
attached to that are a bunch of postings. Okay, that's what you're referring to?
I am,
Those are social media postings?
yes.
And again, what are they concerning?
These are postings that my client, Tom Simich, had collected over some period of time of postings that Mr. Jarrell had placed either on Cleveland.com or on Facebook relating to work that Tom and Landsong had been doing in the City of Seven Hills. And I attached select excerpts from those postings to the original letter in July and reattached them to the letter in December 7 to underscore that we had asserted this basis for Mr. Jarrell's recusal back in the earlier part of the year.
And these postings go all the way back to 2014 and continue through 2016, am I correct?
That's correct.
And they're basically negative postings concerning Mr. Simich and Landsong, am I correct?
They were, from the client's perspective and my own, extremely critical postings.
Basically, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is he's alleging that Landsong does crappy work and bribes politicians to get work in the City of Seven Hills, am I correct?
Yeah, it was our opinion that if you read through some of the select postings, both from Cleveland.com and Facebook, Mr. Jarrell had, I think fairly speaking, accused Tom and Landsong of everything ranging from conspiracy with city officials and bribes, inducing the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency to withhold enforcement actions, insider trading on land deals here in the city, and a general conspiracy or quid pro quo with city officials.
And is it your contention that these postings create a bias on behalf of Mr. Jaros?
It was hard for us to imagine evidence more clearly establishing a predisposition by Mr. Jaros towards Tom and towards Lansong.
Has he done anything else that's referenced in your letters, and I think you've stated it, that has caused you to believe that there is some sort of bias or interference by Mr. Jaros where he wants your client to fail on this application submitted to the city of Seven Hills?
Yes, after we sent the original letter, we anticipated that the law department would advise Mr. Jaros of this issue, and we expected that he would recuse himself from further proceedings. I think I had mentioned I've been to a lot of different meetings in a lot of different official capacities, and recusing yourself from a meeting to preserve due process and the appearance of fairness is the simplest thing that an official can do. And I did it routinely whenever I thought there was any possibility of the appearance of a problem.
And when you're talking recusing yourself, it's not just from the meetings, it's from staying away from the whole subject, even when you're outside of meetings. Am I correct?
Right. It is essentially withdrawing from any participation and stopping yourself from participating in the city's review process for a particular applicant.
And has Mr. Jaros done anything outside of these meetings to thwart and or block or attempt to block this client's application?
Right. What motivated the second letter in December was actually these emails that are attached as Exhibit B to City Exhibit B, which pretty clearly showed that notwithstanding the direction that he recused himself from these proceedings, he was still attempting to thwart the inclusion of Glenn's Landing and Mr. Simich's projects from even appearing on the Planning Commission agenda.
In my Exhibit A, which is your first letter dated July 26th, on the second page, you state in that letter that Mr. Jaros contacted the owner of your client's property?
Yes, essentially, we were informed by Mr. Simich that he received a call from Richard Wagner, who was the representative from First Energy. And Mr. Wagner reported to Mr. Simich that he had been contacted by Mr. Jaros. He said that Mr. Jaros held himself out to be in his official capacity for purposes of the phone call and was alerting Mr. Wagner and First Energy to what Mr. Jaros believed were unauthorized activities on the property.
So basically, he was trying to scare the original owner into backing out of the deal with Mr. Simich or Lansong. Am I correct?
Well, I can't say what his motivation was, but that was the effect.
Are you aware of any other outside interference where he's tried to contact any other contractors or permit holders of Mr. Simich or Lansong?
Well, Mr. Simich also reports that Mr. Jaros had made some contact, either directly or indirectly, to the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and reported that some other unauthorized activities relative to permitted activities under the national permit were also taking place on the property.
Okay. Are you aware of any contact with an Army Corps of Engineers?
Let me check the letter here. As I sit here, I cannot recall it. If it's in the letter, then it was reported accurately according to Mr. Simich.
Okay, so all these bias postings, attempts to block your client, if Mr. Jaros remains on Planning Commission, is this a problem?
Well, we laid all of that out. The short answer is yes, of course.
Why?
Because everyone that appears before a city board, commission, council, or other agency is entitled to due process. And due process ensures not only that a procedure or a hearing will be fair and impartial and unbiased, but that it will also appear to be fair, impartial, and unbiased. And the case law that we laid out in these letters made pretty explicit that even if there's an appearance of a possible impartiality, it is the simplest thing in the world to simply have the member who creates the possibility of that bias recuse him or herself from the proceedings, and the proceedings can go on. And this was a specific objection to Mr. Jaros' participation with regard to a specific applicant before the city. This wasn't meant as a general assault on his participation, just with respect to this client of ours for whom there was this established history of animus.
So you feel that if he does not recuse himself and continues with this this conduct, it will be a denial of your client's due process rights, am I correct?
That is our absolute conclusion.
And is that something that's actionable against Mr. Jaros?
Well, I'll tell you, if it had proceeded along those lines, that would have been the next step for us.
And could it impose any liability on the city?
I have not done the research fully on that, but I know that when you get rogue city agents doing things that they should not do that effect a violation of constitutional rights, that is always an issue of concern for cities.
And when he's contacting or interfering in your contracts, like with the property owner, is that something that is actionable against Mr. Jaros?
That would be the same answer.
And because he represented, according to your letter, that he was contacting the property owner, First Energy, in his official capacity as planning commission member, would that be something that the city of Seven Hills could be held responsible for?
That would have been the next issue for us to investigate, because the planning commission is an approving agency. It's not a policing agency or an enforcing agency. There are agencies within the city to handle those things. That's not the planning commission's job.
I want to bring you to Exhibit A, page 4, and I want you to comment on this statement. It's all the way at the bottom after your number 4. And this is on your July 26, 2016 letter in council. This is my Exhibit A. It's page 4. And I'm going to read it to you, then I want your comment. By accepting appointment as planning commission member, Mr. Jaros has not sacrificed a single one of his constitutional rights as a citizen, but he has unequivocally and voluntarily accepted a share in the city's constitutional duty to ensure that municipal functions are performed beyond reproach. In a nutshell,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Having taken the same oath of office that I'm sure everybody up here at the dais took some version of, having served on the Board of Zoning Appeals where I took the same oath of office, the responsibilities as an elected or an appointed public official put you in a special class of people. And Mr. Jaros, like everybody else up here and everybody on every commission and board, has the option either to serve or not to serve. But when you raise your hand and you swear that you will abide and uphold the Constitution of the U.S. and the state of Ohio and the laws of the city of Seven Hills, that means something. And that may in fact mean that you have to be very mindful of how and when you participate on certain projects. So this was not an infringement or an encroachment on Mr. Jaros' rights. He undertook this responsibility, presumably voluntarily, and owes it to every person, those he likes and those he doesn't like, to treat them in an impartial and unbiased way. And if there is the appearance of bias, to recuse himself from proceedings involving those folks.
And it's your opinion he should have recused himself and stayed as far away from this application for Lansong as he can. Am I correct?
That was our conclusion.
I have no further questions of this witness. Considering Mr. Jaros is not present, I leave it open to council. Thank you.
Do any members of council have questions for this witness? There are none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. DeChiro, please continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Werner, for your testimony here today. You're free to leave. Yeah, could you leave those there, please? Thank you. At this time, the city would call Joseph Jerome.
I do.
For the record, will you please state your name, spelling your last name?
Joseph B. Jerome, Jerome.
And Mr. Jerome, what is your occupation?
I'm an attorney.
And how long have you been an attorney?
1975 November.
Great. And do you have any specialties?
I represent a lot of entities in the construction field and also in real estate. I do from time to time appear before governmental boards associated with work, whether it relates to development or Board of Building Standard matters, etc. But for the most part, I'm construction, real estate, and a commercial attorney handling matters sometimes as a general counsel for smaller companies.
And are you familiar with Lansong Ltd.?
Yes, I've represented Lansong before.
And are you familiar with Tom Simich?
Yes, Tom is the owner of Landsong Limited. He has two other entities with whom he has an affiliation that I've represented him on as well, Landsong Engineering and also Thai Inc.
And are you currently representing Landsong in any litigation?
I am.
Is one of the litigation regarding a Stone Ridge Maintenance Association?
It is, yes.
And the plaintiff in that case is Stone Ridge Maintenance Association, am I
That is
correct?
correct. Yes, sir.
And who are the defendants?
The defendants are Thai Inc. Give you some of the roles there, if you would. That was the excavator of the project. Landsong Limited was the developer, which engaged Thai Inc. And Landsong Engineering was the engineering firm that did the plans and specifications that were tendered to the city for approval before Thai Inc. started the excavation and site development.
Now, there are two lawsuits. There was a first lawsuit, am I correct? The
That is
2011
correct.
suit.
Right.
That case was dismissed,
That's right.
and then it was refiled a second time, am I correct?
That is correct.
And in the first lawsuit, Stone Ridge sued your clients, Landsong and Thai, and they also sued the city of Seven Hills.
That is correct. They sued Seven Hills. Seven Hills was dismissed from the suit on a motion. Landsong Limited, Thai Inc., and Landsong Engineered remained in the lawsuit.
And then there was a second lawsuit where Stone Ridge refiled the lawsuit, am I correct?
That is correct. Right before we were supposed to go to trial, and I say right before, couple weeks, I believe it was, before they dismissed the lawsuit without prejudice, and then they proceeded. There's a saving statute 1 year. They filed within the 1 year period and brought the lawsuit again.
And they added some additional parties.
Yeah, in the first suit, there's a company called Petros, Petros Homes, that we brought in actually, because Petros did some work in this creek area. The subject matter was, there was a creek that was untouched by Landsong Limited in its construction. There was no excavation, there was no fill of the creek area, because in that instance, you need Army Corps of Engineer approvals. You need basically city approvals as well to modify a creek. And the way the development was planned and engineered was there would be no modification of the creek at all. That was approved by the city. We proceeded at that point in time, I say we, Landsong Limited proceeded to build sites for Petros Homes, in other words, buildable sites, and turn the property over.
Right.
As is, no creek modifications whatsoever. After that, Petros Homes, on its own, without Army Corps of Engineer approval, without EPA approval, without city approval, because we took depositions of some of the city people, I believe Mark Morrow and
Mark Papke.
Mark Papke, okay. They just decided that they needed bigger backyards. So Petros Homes, through Tony Ortino, proceeded to fill in the backyards. And the city heard about it. There was no city approval. There was no Army Corps approval, because now you were modifying a waterway which fell under, quote unquote, the navigable waters, or affected the watershed of Lake Erie, etc. But with that knowledge notwithstanding, and there was another company involved, Modern Port Walls, which was the excavator, fine grader of the property for Petros Homes.
Now, I want to get more into that. Now, because of this modification, you're in this lawsuit, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In both lawsuits, who are the participants from the plaintiff, Stone Ridge Maintenance Association? Who's participating? Who's showing up at court? Who's showing up at...
It was always and basically only Todd Jarrells.
Okay. And he shows up at depositions too, am I correct?
He showed up at depositions. He was deposed. Ginny Roberts was deposed, who is his, I guess, his living mate. And there were only two people, but Mr. Jarrells was definitely pulling the strings.
And he also answered the interrogatories, which is the discovery in the case. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Have you seen any of the other 55 homeowners?
Other than Miss Roberts, but that's only because we deposed her. It wasn't a voluntary appearance.
but it's mainly Mr. Jaros.
Sure, I mean, I've read the documents. We had a significant amount of discovery. It was pretty clear from the, should I say, email meetings of the board that Mr. Jaros was calling the shots.
And it was Mr. Jaros, you took his deposition, I'm going to admit it into the record later, but it was Mr. Jaros who made the recommendation to initiate the lawsuit against Lansong. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
And it was Mr. Jaros who is conveniently now the management company since 2010 for the Stone Ridge Maintenance Association. Am I correct?
Might I add, yes, it was, the property was developed by Petros, turned over to the association after Petros was done. Then they managed it. There was a company that managed, I believe, during the Petros period until it was turned, then the association said, stop, and we'll self-manage. And at that time, per his testimony, under deposition, Mr. Jaros did the day-to-day operations of the association.
Now, in the first lawsuit, I can't stay behind that podium. In the first lawsuit,
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
that's okay. You need some water?
Is there some water there?
Yes.
If you would, please, yeah. Yes.
In the first lawsuit, when he sued Seven Hills and your clients, you took his deposition,
I did.
and there was overwhelming evidence that Petros Homes or its affiliates had something to do with this wrong grading. Am I correct?
I call it overwhelming to the extent that he was in a deposition, and a fellow by the name of Anthony Artino testified that he, as a worker for Petros Homes, filled in the back after we, meaning Lansong Limited, transferred title, that we had no participation whatsoever in the filling in of the creek. And as a result, basically, I won't say basically, admitted that he was at fault. Never got approval of the Army Corps, etc. And as a result, this filling, which is about 6-7 feet of fill, meaning excavations from the basements, were placed into the waterway.
And Tom Jaros, as the acting board member for Stone Ridge Maintenance Association, never sued Petros Homes or any of its affiliates. Am I
No.
correct? And is that because his paramour, whoever he's living with, Ginny Roberts, works for Petros or one of their affiliates? Am I correct?
Circumstantially, you've got to say that. I mean, he never admitted that was the reason. But the fact of the matter is, he never sued Petros Homes. He never sued Modern Poured Walls, who actually did this work. When I raised it during the course of the deposition, saying, why didn't you sue Petros Homes? Because you knew, excuse me, that Mr. Artino did this for Petros Homes. His response was, well, he would be making an assumption. And since Lansong Limited was the developer, clearly he should be going after Lansong Limited, notwithstanding the fact that he knew that Petros Homes filled it in. And I said, well, and this is my characterization of it, but just because Lansong Limited was the developer, that gives you reason to spout against them and not Petros. And his response was, yeah, they were the developer.
So he singled your client out, Lansong, and Tom
singled
Sim.
all three clients out in basically a shotgun approach, saying you're responsible to fix what was done by somebody else.
Now, some quick dissertation. In the second lawsuit, he sues Petros, correct?
That time he sued Petros, yeah.
But it was too late. The statute of limitations is run out. Am I correct?
Right, they Petros and Modern Poured Walls working for, excuse me, for Petros filed motions to dismiss. They were dismissed out, but we remained in because we were not dismissed.
And now your case is still pending against Lansong. Am I correct?
Except for trial, jury trial on August 28th in front of Judge Dick Ambrose.
Okay. And Mr. Jaros has identified that the only two witnesses, besides maybe having Mark Papke and Mark Morrow, is him and Ginny Roberts. There's no other residents coming in from Stone Ridge, am I correct?
I don't think I've ever heard of any residents being, any participants in this process.
And if Mr. Jaros loses the lawsuit, he has no ability to go against Petros because he blew the statute on that, right?
Yeah, he never filed directly until the second lawsuit, and I think that was only as a matter of necessity.
And that's because he singled your client out and wouldn't sue Petros because Ginny Roberts worked for Petros or an affiliate. Am I correct?
He never said that directly, but I think you can come to a general conclusion that why would he, well, you gotta remember, Miss Roberts was on the board too.
Right.
Okay, so was he, Miss Roberts, and some other lady, and I can't even pronounce her last name, begins with a P, but it was always Tom Jaros making decisions.
And can I ask you, do you know if he's been informing the residents of Stone Ridge about this lawsuit?
I asked, and I saw some of the communications, and it was, if he was communicating, I don't remember seeing any board meetings or anything like that. We did receive some copies of things, and just seems like he ran the show, period.
It's him.
Made all the decisions.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Him against Tom Simich and Lansong. That's what it comes down to, right?
He didn't let the facts get in the way of his approach.
And there was a settlement offer, and he basically shut that down. Am I correct?
Well, the fact is, I won't say we, the insurance companies offered a bunch of money just to get rid of the doggone thing. And I would say, you don't have any choice when the insurance companies want to get rid of it. And then it would have been enough to repair and then some. And he turned around and said, well, that's fine. The association will be happy to, we'll take your money. But if we want to, we personally, meaning homeowners, and he's not even a homeowner, I should probably add.
Right, he doesn't own a piece of property there.
Miss Roberts owns the property, yet somehow, and I've never seen this before, quite honestly, Mr. DeChiro, somehow a non-resident is allowed to be on the board and participate as a board member. I've never seen that before. Usually it's in homeowners associations, and I've represented, sorry, gentlemen, homeowner associations and condo associations before, and here is this non-member who's basically running the show. And that's very, very peculiar, but apparently that's what their bylaws, I'm sorry, doggone it, their declaration permits.
And he's not financing this litigation, the association is, am I correct?
God knows how much they've got into it with 2 lawsuits with, I know what I have into it, and they put a lot of money into this litigation.
And if he doesn't win, he doesn't care, win or lose, because he doesn't even own a unit there, like you said.
Well, I guess his roommate, Miss Roberts, might care, but yeah, I guess there's no financial impact. I have asked him if he's entitled to any compensation for his services. I've never gotten a straight answer in that regards, or any expectation of being compensated.
And he's turned down a significant offer that could probably change the lives of these people in that development, but yet he doesn't care because, again, he doesn't own a unit. He's not going to benefit in any way. Am I correct in that?
The concern is this, okay? We give them enough money to fix it, okay, acceptable amount. They may never fix it, and yet they want to retain the right to go after Tom Simich and his companies after the fact if there's anything ever happens to their foundation. So putting it mildly, I mean, you can't be much more absurd to take the money to fix it and then retain the right to go personally. I'm not talking about the association, but all these homeowners could arguably personally go after my clients, and I say that plurally because I've represented all 3 of them. In this litigation, I only represent Lansong, and there are 2 defense attorneys that were hired, so we're basically co-counsel on this.
So basically, he wants Tom Simich to pay and continue to pay for the next 10
Well,
years?
potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, if something ever happens, if there's any damages to the non-common areas, understand that the creek would be considered a common area, then they have patios. And if something happened to those patios that were built on top of the fill, they want the right to go after, the Landsong entities, the Simich entities.
And Mr. Jerome, your observations relative to Mr. Jaros's opinion and treatment of your client Landsong and Tom Simich, your observations.
He's got a bug. And fortunately, he's got this entity called Stone Ridge Maintenance Association that he's using. Well, I mean, Stone Ridge Maintenance Association is attacking without any merit the Landsong entities, and he's getting away with it until such time as either there's a settlement or Judge Ambrose and a jury in August decide you shouldn't be doing that. Unfortunately, you get experts, and one expert says one thing and one expert says another, and you've got to try the case, even though, in my opinion, there's absolutely no merit.
Would you say this is pretty much a personal vendetta by Mr. Jaros against Tom Simich and Landsong?
Well, as Mr. Werner had testified, I've seen some of his social media stuff too, and you combine it with the facts being what they are, his knowledge being what it is, and then the social media stuff, it's definitely not an objective review and analysis of the situation. I've got to call it personal, yes.
Thank you. And a couple of things, I want you to identify a couple exhibits. I'm going to hand you what's been marked City's Exhibit D. Can you identify that for the record?
Yes, sir. This is a copy of the docket CB 11758389. It's the Stone Ridge Maintenance Association versus the City of Seven Hills. That's what you referred to, Mr. Chair, as the first case. That was the case that was ultimately dismissed without prejudice. That was the case in which the City of Seven Hills was sued. It was represented for a while by a fellow by the name of Kenneth Abarno, and they ultimately, on motion, city was dismissed.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand you what's been marked City's Exhibit E. If you could identify that for the record.
This is what you referred to, Mr. DeChiro, was the second case. This is also Stone Ridge. In this instance, the lead defendant is Landsong Limited. It was brought back before Judge Ambrose. And as is the case, when a case is dismissed, when it's refiled, it's brought back to the same judge. And Judge Ambrose is now the judge that handles this, is handling this. And this matter is set for jury trial starting again in August of 2017. The only parties that are in this suit, though, in the second suit, are the Landsong entities, as you referenced before. Even though Petros, Holmes, and Modern Ford Walls were brought in this case, they were dismissed from the case because they're outside the statute of limitations. So it's basically the association versus the Simich entities.
And finally, I'm going to go a little out of alphabetical order because I marked these exhibits ahead of time. Exhibit J. And I've only got one of these.
Yes, sir. Exhibit J is the deposition that I and others took of Mr. Jaros. The date on that is the transcript. This was conducted on the 20th of March, 2013. I did, in anticipation of appearing today, read it quickly, and had some prior notes and brought back to refresh my recollection of many of the things that I testified to today, factual with Mr. DeChiro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerome, for your testimony today and your appearance. Thank you.
Does anybody on city council have questions for this witness?
Mr. President,
Councilman Kukrow.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
So I don't know if this was clear, the lawsuit that Mr. Jaros is doing against the developer, was that being paid for out of his own pocket or the association? I don't know if I heard.
Well, I don't know what the representation agreement is, but the party is Stone Ridge Maintenance, and they paid for I presume they paid for everything. I've never seen, you're not allowed to see the attorney's fees, but the presumption is when you have a plaintiff and they have an attorney, that's a relationship between them. Mr. Jaros has never indicated to me or anyone else that he's got some personal checks or payments made for representation.
Anybody further? Mr. Hunt?
Just for the information of the council, Mr. Jerome, you've taken, I believe she's referred to as Ginny Roberts' deposition?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Is that Virginia Roberts?
Yes,
Okay.
Virginia Roberts,
And what specifically, I assume you asked, what specifically was her relationship to Mr. Jaros?
they lived together. His testimony was that she purchased a unit at Stone Ridge, and subsequent to prior to his moving in, these issues came up about the creek and the erosion, and that he basically stepped in, and he was the one who began the investigation of an analysis of what occurred. And this was before he moved in, after, acknowledged, and Petros Homes acknowledged that they had done the fill. Yet, fully disregarded the fact it didn't really matter to him anyway.
And did you delve into the exact position Mr. Jaros had with the Stone Ridge Maintenance Association? Other than referred to him as a board member, did he have an office? Was he an officer?
His own testimony was that he handled the day-to-day operations, that he exclusively handled the day-to-day operations, that from time to time, I would say he communicated with the other two board members, but he made it very clear that he was the one who called the shots. It's very peculiar, Mr. Hunt, that basically, I won't say the other two board members abandoned, but basically they let him have his way.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions in light of the questions asked by council. Is that okay?
Please.
A couple points I want to reiterate. Mr. Jerome, you read the deposition. It was Mr. Jaros's recommendation that they initiate this lawsuit. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it's Mr. Jaros who's been showing up at court and showing up at depositions and answering discovery. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, he hasn't really been communicating with these other 55 homeowners.
I mean, I asked under discovery for copies of the minutes and the like, and there certainly appeared to me to be little, if any, participation by the members. It was always a matter of Tom Jaros recommending this, Tom Jaros suggesting that, Tom Jaros making decisions on behalf of this association.
Spending their money as he sees fit. Am I correct?
It sure seems that way. Again, I don't know what the representation agreement was, but the presumption is that if you represent a client, that the client's paying for it, not a member of the board or obviously members of the association.
And one last question. All these records, you took the deposition, all these records of this Stone Ridge Maintenance Association are sitting in some room or closet in Ginny Roberts' unit.
That apparently, at least at the time I took the deposition in 2013, That's where all the records were. I asked him a specific question. Where are the records of the association? He said, somewhere in Ginny's unit. It was sort of an obtuse response.
Thank you, Mr. Jerome.
Is there anybody further for this witness? Thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir.
The city would call Vince Rufa.
May I continue to just sit in?
Yeah. Mr. Rufa, will you please state your name for the record, spelling your last name?
Sure, Vince Rufa, R-U-F-F-A.
And Mr. Rufa, what is your occupation?
I am also an attorney.
I'm sorry?
I'm an attorney.
Okay. Could you speak up?
Sure.
All right. Sorry about that. And are you also the Planning Commission Chairman of the City of Seven Hills?
I am, yes.
And were you the Planning Commission Secretary in 2016?
The chair, yes, part of 2016. Yes.
And are you pretty familiar with how cities work and planning commissions work?
I have some idea.
How is that?
As an attorney, I represent municipalities. I'm currently the law director and prosecutor in the city of Broadview Heights. I'm the assistant law director, prosecutor in Newburgh Heights. I represent Brooklyn as a magistrate. I've represented cities in the past as law director, prosecutor. Those include Walton Hills, Brunswick, and Bedford Heights. So in that capacity, I've been involved, in all of those capacities, I've been involved in municipalities for the past 20 years in representing them and advising them in different aspects, including planning commissions and boards of zoning appeals for those various cities.
And a big question, as planning commission, as a member of the planning commission, are you getting paid?
This planning commission, yes. A whopping sum, yes.
Are you aware of a development on Rockside Road called Glenn's Landing?
Yes,
Are you aware who's part of Glenn's Landing?
yes,
Is that a Landsong Ltd?
yes,
Is that also known as, well, Landsong is represented or has appeared before with Tom Simich? Am I correct? Is that something
you are
there?
correct, yes.
And are you aware whether they raised concerns regarding one of your members?
Yeah, concerns were raised early on last year with respect to one of the planning commission members via letter sent by Gary Warner, who testified earlier. I believe he sent 2 or 3 letters.
And that member was Tom Jaros?
Mr. Jaros, correct.
And do you know the nature of what their problem was with Mr. Jaros?
They indicated that he had a conflict with respect to their client and their client's project. They spelled out the reasons for the conflict, and they demanded that he recuse himself from any matter involving that particular client.
And have you been involved or witnessed any meetings where it was suggested that Mr. Jaros recuse himself to avoid any impropriety, conflict, and bias by either other planning commission members or by a city attorney for the city of Seven Hills?
I have.
And how has he taken to that?
Initially, he agreed to not be involved. That changed later.
Now, Mr. Jaros, in your expertise and as a planning commission chairman, if he has a conflict, how should he react to this on planning commission?
So whenever there's a conflict, the appropriate thing to do would be to remove yourself from that situation. By way of example, only last week we had a planning commission meeting. I personally had a conflict involving one of the items on the agenda. So we changed the order of the agenda so I would be able to recuse myself and leave the meeting, and they could proceed without me just because of the conflict or the appearance of the conflict. It was just the appropriate thing to do. And so that's what happened. As soon as that topic came up, I left the room, I left the building, I got in my car and I drove home.
Now, when you say recuse yourself, do you mean just from meetings or just from avoiding anything to do with the matter?
Anything to do with the matter.
Even outside of planning commission?
Correct.
Because you're a public official, am I correct?
Correct.
You don't want to show any impropriety or bias, am I correct?
Real or perceived, yes.
Yes. Are you aware whether Mr. Jaros has totally recused himself from the Glenn's Landing Landsong matter?
So initially, yes, but then we had a meeting in which he announced that he would no longer recuse himself from that project.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked Exhibit I. Can you identify that if you can?
There are meeting minutes from the Planning Commission meeting dated January 5th, 2017.
Thank you. And with respect to that meeting, you were present at that meeting?
I was.
And during that meeting, I want you to turn to page 5. And if you could look at the bottom of that page, was there any time that you remember, or does this refresh your memory, that Mr. Jaros got up and spoke that he contacted the Army Corps of Engineers concerning the specific permit related to Landsong LTD?
He did do that, yes.
Okay. Now, for a person who's supposed to have a bias or recuse himself, is this something he should be doing?
No.
Is this something that a planning commission member should be doing?
No.
Even in the normal course of their duty?
Correct.
You heard Mr. Werner testify about contacting the owner of a property to interfere with Landsong's option on that property. Is that something that a planning commission member normally should be doing?
Absolutely not.
And what about someone who's alleged to have had a bias?
Even more so.
Would you say this contacting permit holders, contacting property owners specifically, is beyond the scope of his duties as a planning commission member?
Yes.
And he especially shouldn't be doing it if he has a bias or prejudice, am I correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Jaros, you said, now is upset and says he's not going to recuse himself from any more meetings. Am I correct?
That is what occurred, yes.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked. As Exhibit H. Can you identify that for the record?
This is an email from Mr. Jaros sent to, looks like the members of council, the mayor, the clerk of the planning commission, and myself. And it's a letter regarding his participation in the planning commission.
Give me one moment. And this is something you received?
I believe so, yes. I was CC'd on it, so I'm assuming I got it.
Yes. In fact, your name's right at the top on the CC, Vince Rufa.
Correct.
And in that first sentence, he says, I'll expect no further interference in my planning commission participation due to the false claim made by Burns Ochner and referenced in the attached letter. First off, who is Burns Ochner?
Burns Ochner is the law firm that Gary Warner works for with,
Who's representing Landsong?
Landsong, correct.
And what is your interpretation of that letter? Is he going to recuse himself any further?
My interpretation is that he expects to participate going forward.
And again, considering what you know of the allegations by the developer and your own observations, is it a good idea that Mr. Jaros continue to participate in planning commission with respect to this developer applicant, Landsong?
No.
He has also been contacting members of City Hall to obtain information on this developer applicant's application. It's actually attached to Gary Werner's letter as a Exhibit C. Again, is this something he should be doing?
Contacting members of the administration to ask questions in and of itself.
When he has a conflict.
Oh, when absolutely. When there's a conflict, there should be no participation whatsoever.
Okay. And from March 2016, when he was appointed, till about December 2016, till when he was about suspended, did Mr. Jaros in general participate as a planning commission member, attend meetings, deliberate, discuss topics, and vote on matters with the planning commission meeting? With the planning commission?
On matters that did not involve this particular client, yes.
One moment, counsel. I have no further questions of Mr. Rufa. I turn him over to counsel.
Sorry, the microphone doesn't seem to be working. Does anybody on the dais have questions for Mr. Rufa?
President,
Mr. Councilman Kranek.
permission for expansion clarification based upon Exhibit I, page 5. Starting at the top about the third line down. And this is a little, this is Mr. Jaros speaking. He says, I have been kept from participating because of a supposed bias for possible bias on whatever complaint coming from the developer. The next line says, Mr. Rufa has in his possession a letter from the developer's attorney that said that they made a mistake in saying that I had a conflict on this particular interest, so I expect to be fully functioning in this job.
So, am I responding to that?
Yes, and then I would like to respond, Mr. President, please.
That is Mr. Jaros's interpretation, but those letters in no way indicate that they made a mistake with respect to him having a conflict. There were three letters, I believe. They corrected a small fact, but in no way ever removed their assertion that they believed he had a conflict. So this is a misinterpretation of that letter. And you should have those letters. I believe they were handed out.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Mr. DeChiro, please.
Councilman Kranek, if you refer to Exhibit C, it's the third letter dated December 13th. It was just the clarification letter. In the first letter sent by Stone Ridge, I'm sorry, is that? Whose phone is that?
It's the one in the chair, Pat.
No. Whose is this? And what's it doing on the chair? Going off at this meeting? I want to remove from Mr. Chairman. I'd like this gentleman removed for disturbing the public meeting here.
If we could ask everybody in the audience to turn their phones off, please, including Mr. Chura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I apologize, Councilman Kranek. So, in the letter they sent a week prior to this, they said, you sued us. And they corrected it, that it was not, he's not a named party plaintiff to the lawsuit against Landsong, and they said he was. They just corrected it. He sued them through Stone Ridge Maintenance Association. So if you look at the letter dated December 13th, it says Mr. Jaros was not a named party plaintiff. Doesn't mean he doesn't have a conflict. It just says he was not a named plaintiff. Okay? He is, the interpretation of Bernd Zochner is that he is the plaintiff. He is a representative of the plaintiff, as you've heard Mr. Jerome testify. So that was the only correction. It was, as Mr. Rufa correctly stated, it's a small correction, but it doesn't relieve the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification.
Mr. Hunt?
Mr. Hunt.
One request for clarification, Mr. Rufer. Right at the end of your testimony, you referred to a client, and I believe you're referring to Landsong Limited as a client. Is that a client or an applicant developer? If you use the word client, and
I apologize, force of habit, I guess, but the applicant.
Anybody further on the dais for Mr. Rufa? Thank you for being here. Back to you, Mr. DeChiro.
Thank you. Nothing further. I would like to call Terry Manson to the stand and ask that she be sworn in. For the record, will you please state your name, spelling your last name?
Teresa Matson, M-A-T-S-O-N.
And Ms. Manson, are you familiar with the Seven Hills Planning Commission?
Yes, I am.
And how so?
I'm the Planning Commission Secretary
And how long have you been the Planning Commission Secretary?
since 1995.
And you're aware of Mr. Jaros, am I correct, the Planning Commission member?
Yes, I am.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked Exhibit F. And for
Mr.
the,
DeChiro, one minute. You've got about 6 minutes left in
Okay.
the first hour and 15 minutes.
I will be pretty quick with this witness, and then we'll see where we stand. Ms. Manson, can you identify Exhibit F?
Yes, I can. It's the letter that was sent to you as far as the compensation or payment of Mr. Jaros or non-payment of his, what the timeline was.
So you prepared this along with Jackie Payne, am I correct?
Correct.
And just to review this, Mr. Jaros was appointed in March 14, 2016, am I correct?
Correct.
And what is the standard procedure when someone gets appointed to the Planning Commission? What do you do?
Standard procedure is
Can you speak up?
Jackie Payton from payroll will give me a packet to give to the member, whether it's planning, zoning, or whatever, and in that application is the application for employment, the W-2 forms, all the government forms for payment. That was given to Mr. DeChiro to Mr. Jaros at the March meeting. It was never returned to either myself or to Jackie Payton. So again, in August, Jackie Payton asked me to give him another packet, which we did. That packet was never returned until February of this year.
February 9th, 2017?
Correct.
And who was it returned to?
It was originally returned to the engineering department in a folder or an envelope, and they in turn gave it to me, which I in turn gave it to Jackie Payton, the payroll clerk.
Okay. Now, during this period of time, was Mr. Jaros sitting on Planning Commission?
Yes, he was, both regular meetings and work sessions.
Great, and he was attending the meetings, he was deliberating,
Correct.
he was voting,
Correct.
and during this entire period of time while he was serving on Planning Commission, did he ever ask you why he wasn't getting paid?
No, he did not.
And it took him almost a year to return the payroll documents, am I correct?
Correct.
And the only time Mr. Jaros didn't participate at planning commission meetings was when he recused himself. Am I correct?
Correct.
And again, just one more time. He never came up to you, emailed you, contacted you, said, hey, I'm not getting paid.
No, I did not.
I have no further questions of this witness.
Does anybody on the dais have questions for Mrs. Mattson?
Yes, you
Councilman
said,
Becker.
I'm sorry. Yes, you said he returned his packet, this February.
Yes.
Now, has he been getting paid for his service?
That's the payroll clerk. I really don't take care of the payments, but it's my understanding that the same time that he was returning his payroll packet, she received a letter or a memo stating that he was suspended from the board. So she did not pay him.
Any further questions from anybody on the dais for Mrs. Mattson? Thank you for being here.
At this time, I have one more witness. Should be very short, like Ms. Mattson. I don't know how much time I have left, Mr. Hunt, and I would like to motion for my additional 15 minutes if I could, if Mr. Jaros is obviously not going to participate.
You have 15 minutes if you get your rebuttal time added, but the rest of your time is up in about 30 seconds.
Okay, I would like to make a motion for additional time to allow this last witness in.
It's up to you.
It could be taken off my rebuttal time.
Does
It's up to
anybody,
you, Mr. President.
does anybody on council have a problem with taking that time off of his rebuttal time? Please move forward, Pat.
Thank you. At this time, I would call Jackie Payton to the stand, and Terry Mattson is going to get her. She is present.
We'll stop the clock until she arrives.
Will you please state your name for the record and spell your last name?
Jackie Payton, P-A-T-O-N,
And what is your occupation?
payroll clerk.
And for the city of Seven Hills?
Yes,
And how long have you been doing that?
34 years.
When an employee, elected official, or appointed official, or even a planning commission member engages employment with the city of Seven Hills, is there anything that must be filled out in order to process that person's payroll?
Application and all the paperwork that goes with that.
Is there a packet?
Yes,
Okay. And was there a packet provided for Mr. Jaros?
yes.
Who was that provided to?
Terry Manson?
Okay. And that was provided right around the time of his appointment in March of 2016, am I correct?
Yes.
And did the initial packet ever get returned?
No.
Was there a second packet given?
Yes.
Who was it given to?
Terry?
And did you ultimately get that second packet back?
Yes.
When was that?
February of this year.
February 9th, 2017.
Correct.
So the first packet was given in March of 2016, am I correct?
Yes.
And the second packet was given in August of 2016. Am I correct?
Yes.
And it wasn't returned to you until February 9th, 2017 of this year?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked Exhibit G. And I'm going to ask you to identify that, look through it while I pass out, and I want to note for council that Social Security numbers have been redacted. Do you know what that is?
Yes,
Is that the payroll packet?
it is.
So let's go through it. First off, the first page is IT4. That's pretty much filled out, am I correct?
Yes,
And actually, it's signed and dated by Mr. Jaros, December 25th, 2016. Christmas Day.
correct.
We weren't open Christmas Day, were we?
No,
Okay, good. Then there's page 2, which is the statement concerning your employment in a job not covered by Social Security. And does this look to be completed?
yes,
Okay. Let's turn to the next page, the W-4. Is this the form that's sent into the IRS?
correct.
And is it completed?
No,
It's not even filled out, is it?
no,
Let's turn to the next page. This is the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System form, and actually this is 2 pages. Is this filled out correctly?
yes,
All right, let's continue on to the next document, which is the application for employment. And this is actually, if I'm correct, this is a 5-page document, am I correct? Or actually 6 pages. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th page is a instruction sheet. Is that filled out completely?
somewhat.
Somewhat. What's missing?
Well, any previous employment
Okay.
and then any schooling,
Okay. So
references,
it's incomplete,
yeah,
in your opinion, as payroll clerk.
yes,
All right, let's turn to the last form, the last 2 pages. And this is a form that says Department of Homeland Security. Am I correct?
yes,
So this is to be filled out, am I correct?
yes it is.
And this is to be filled out and signed. I notice on page 1, there's no signature. Am I correct? I'm talking about the Department of Homeland Security form. This one right here, yeah, second to last page.
Second page. Right, it's not signed.
It's not signed. And also, on page 2, you look at that document, the Department of Homeland Security requires that you give acceptable identification. Am I correct?
Yes,
An acceptable identification would be what? A driver's license and social security card?
that or a passport.
Were any of those given to you?
No,
So, all in all, this payroll application is incomplete. Am I correct?
correct.
You can't even pay this gentleman because he hasn't even signed the appropriate IRS and federal forms. Am I correct?
Yes,
You want to pay him, but you can't.
correct.
And during the whole year of March of 2016 to the present time, you've seen Mr. Jaros at City Hall. He knows you're the payroll clerk. Has he ever contacted you, emailed you, did anything to say, hey, Jackie, I'm not getting paid?
No,
I have no further questions.
Does anybody on council have any questions for Mrs. Payton? Thank you for being here today.
At this time, this concludes the presentation of my case. I would rest subject to the admission of all my exhibits, and if I could compile them, please.
Please.
Yes. Mr. President, I'd like to admit in Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, Exhibit D, Exhibit E, Exhibit F, Exhibit G, Exhibit H, Exhibit I, and I have not provided, but Exhibit J is the copy of the deposition of Mr. Thomas Jaros, which was identified by Joseph Jerome. It's such a big exhibit, I've only included one.
Thank you. We will accept those. I believe if you so choose, you have about 10 minutes remaining for any closing statement you wish to make.
You heard a little of my opening, and I want to conclude with the following. May it please all of council and the president, I believe there's sufficient grounds to remove this gentleman. Gross misconduct. That's one of the things covered by Article 3, Section 9. So what is the gross misconduct? Continually trying to involve himself in the planning commission meetings with regard to Lansong after being advised of a conflict and a bias by other members of the planning commission and legal counsel. You heard Mr. Rufa, he was present. He's been put on notice, yet he still wants to participate. And we're trying to show everybody that we're clean and there's no violation of anybody's due process, but that can't happen as long as Mr. Jaros is sitting on planning commission. But let's make matters worse. We have an applicant here in the city of Seven Hills, and he is, part of his gross misconduct is he's posting negative commentary about them on social media. He is entitled to a fair hearing, and we have one of our members of planning commission posting stuff on social media. It's unacceptable, and it's a denial of his due process rights, the applicant, Lansong. He's continually contacting city officials. If you look at the exhibits of some of Mr. Werner's letters, he's attaching memos where Tom is contacting some of the city officials, finding out what's happening with this application. And believe me, he's not interested in seeing that it's going to get passed. He's interested in seeing that it's going to get blocked. Interfering with the private contracts of a developer applicant. That's me. That's it right there. He is interfering with private contracts. In civil law, we call that tortious interference of contracts. You heard from Mr. Werner. He's trying to ruin their option with First Energy. And he's contacting the Army Corps of Engineers, not generally, but about this permit. I'm sure he wants to see it get revoked. And I guarantee you, if that permit gets revoked, or if the deal for them falls through on Rockside Road where they don't get that property, there's going to be someone who's going to pay. And it's going to be Tom Jaros and us, because we're allowing this conduct to continue. What else is this gross misconduct? He never completed the forms to get paid. This man is going on social media. I've never been paid. I'm not a member. I'm not a member. Well, guess what? You sat at meetings, you voted at those meetings, you deliberated at those meetings. The reason you're not getting paid is because you didn't fill out the forms. You had a year. You know how to contact everybody at City Hall. I see the emails. Yet he couldn't contact our finance director, couldn't ask Jackie, or couldn't ask Terry. No, this man comes in here with unclean hands. I'm not getting paid. Oh, it's his own doing. Those are the 5 things I believe caused the gross misconduct. Postings, interfering with permits, not recusing himself, not submitting payroll. I missed one, but and interfering, like I said, with the contracts. Let's talk about misfeasance. Ms. Feasance is improperly performing his job. Well, improperly performing his job. He shouldn't be going out contacting permit holders, and he shouldn't go out contacting people who the applicants are doing business with. That's not the job of the Planning Commission. The job of the Planning Commission, if you look at our charter, is to review plans, make recommendations to council, not conduct investigations, not contact their persons who they have contractual deals or permits with. That's not their job. And especially a guy who's got a bias or a conflict. Then there's any other matter which would disqualify him. He's got a bias. There's no doubt. He's posted negative stuff. He's posted negative stuff on the media. It's in there. Oh, they do crappy work, Lansong. Another crappy job. And guess what? Because they donate to your campaign, they're paying off all the city officials. We know that's not true. But that's the perception he's giving. Can this man sit on the Planning Commission and give a fair hearing to these people? No. Should he shut up as a public official to avoid any impropriety? Yes. But he's not doing that. Despite the foregoing conflict of interest and the bias, the respondent, Mr. Jaros, has been truculent, because I've been there, about recusing himself from Planning Commission meetings. He has stated in that letter that I gave to Mr. Rufa, I'm not recusing myself anymore. I don't give a damn. Screw Burns and Ochner. I'm showing up. Failing to recuse himself from contacting city officials about this permit, he needs to stay away from this. And continuing to post negative commentary. And finally, another reason, besides conflict of interest and bias, another reason, he's exceeded his authority as a public official. Again, he can't go out and interfere with their individual contracts. That's beyond the scope of what we've given him authority to do as council. And that, to me, is the worst thing. Respondents' continued interaction with Lansong and Tom Simich may constitute a violation of the developer's due process as long as he sits on this Planning Commission and conducts himself in the foregoing manner. The letters from Burns Ochner and Gary Werner, who testified here today, are pretty much a precursor. They're putting us on notice and warning us that this conduct cannot be tolerated. And if we don't do something about it, we may be held responsible. We. The amazing thing is that Mr. Jaros has been advised by other Planning Commission members, you heard Mr. Ruffy's been in meetings, and council to cease his conduct and recuse himself from these matters. He was advised of this back in July. He got the letters. And despite all that, he fails to heed the advice. In fact, we tell him, stay away, don't do anything, give these people a fair process. What does he do? Sends a letter January 4th. I'm sitting on meetings and no one's interfering. On January 5th, he reports to the Planning Commission, hey, guess what? I contacted the Army Corps of Engineers. And I talked specifically about the Tom Simich Lansong permit. I'm telling you, if that permit falls through, Gary Werner has put us on notice. His actions are reprehensible. He does not care about the city or the rights of the applicant. He has been given legal advice and failed to listen. Instead, he has his own agenda, and he won't listen to reason. For him to continue on Planning Commission would potentially be subjecting the city to liability for his misconduct. Thus, the only thing to do, since he won't listen, is to remove him. And I ask council to do that. And just like the Stone Ridge lawsuit, it's clear in the Stone Ridge lawsuit. And I know the question was asked, who's paying that? Stone Ridge is paying that, but it's his lawsuit. He's not communicating with the homeowners. He didn't sue one of the parties, Petros, because his girlfriend works for them or works with an affiliate. That is his own lawsuit. He wants Tom Simich. He had a chance to settle the case, turned it down, because you know what? He doesn't own a unit and he doesn't care. He doesn't care about those homeowners, just like he doesn't care about the city of Seven Hills. All he cares about is his own personal agenda. As for his ridiculous argument that he wasn't a member of council because he hasn't been paid, again, come on. If you don't fill out the forms to get paid, then we can't pay you. It's not that we don't want to. It's that we can't, because you've prohibited us from doing this. As I said, all these things add up to all the things I've said: gross misconduct, bias, misfeasance, all this stuff that Section 3, Article 5 says we should remove him for. And I believe he should be removed. To keep him on Planning Commission is dangerous. Dangerous for the city, and dangerous for the applicant, and dangerous for the people of the city of Seven Hills. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeChiro. Before we continue, I do want the record to reflect that Mr. Jaros is not present in the room to take up his 1 hour and 15 minutes that he has been allotted. Any vote by council on this matter will be taken in public immediately following executive session. With that, I'm going to make a motion to go into executive session to deliberate and meet with council regarding a personnel matter.
I second the motion.
We're going to take a roll call vote. Councilman Kranek.
Yes.
Councilman Bicker.
Yes.
Councilman Biassiata.
Yes.
Councilman Petro.
Yes.
Councilman Krukow.
Yes.
Councilman Frondor.
Yes.
Councilman Traffus. Yes. We are going to adjourn into executive session and
One
invite.
thing, Mr. President, and that is your reference to counsel is COUNSEL, meeting with counsel over an employment issue, and you have the right to do that under the Ohio Sunshine Laws. Secondly, I give an admonition to counsel is that you are only to discuss the evidence that was presented at this hearing in deliberations, and the evidence that was produced under oath, and the exhibits that were admitted at this hearing.
Thank you. And with that, we are going to adjourn into executive session, and we'll be back soon.
My boss right there? You get a chance to talk to him? Yeah. You okay?
This damn science thing that I screwed up
We'll show as long as you're okay. He's a baby.
All right, fellas.
I've been around. I know, I don't care. You know, I was always running. I don't think it all right. Here's around. She's like talking to a lot of ass. So we just look at the number of blocks. Mr. Prosecutor, we go. Boy, you're bad. Yeah. Sit down. I just handle it. I already did some good. Hey, Mike's drinking the water. Is that so many cases? So that's but there's a little bit. I don't so I'll have to see you. Thank you.
Sure. I think you want me to wait until I.
Yes. Everybody, thank you also. Either Charlie. There's a new Marina. Yeah, there was another place. Once I start moving around. So anyways, it's just, yeah. Seat by seat, arrow. Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah. Well, yes. Put it slide. Yes, because no. I got You'll keep once in a while, but I got something questions. Sure. What's a while? Yeah. And they what can I say? Is it already? We do stuff like that. We say actually there was just 20 years ago. Sorry, that's the reason I didn't walk. I sat there and asked no questions. I wouldn't make it look like I had no questions. I participated in this. What I was to say is that I got screwed up in the some of those better screwed me later. She read my mind. So, you can set on your phone.
Yeah, yeah. Do you? Yeah, well, actually, when I started, it was downtown, that street, and they moved across the street. The cover building was across the street. Other than. Well, I think it was better. I think it's really. Well, the machine part is all the same, but just for this new expanded the opportunity. Students in It's good. I know. Yeah, I guess too. So I'm saying is basically spent all that.
Yeah. This year, the road. I'm just telling you about this. Yeah, I see it. I don't know. Have you done that? And then my, he said it's.
Several steps away.
Okay, we are going to reconvene this removal hearing. Are there any comments from anybody on the dais?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. President.
Councilman Frondor?
I make a motion to remove Tom Giles from the Seven Hills Planning Commission based upon the preponderance of evidence presented at this hearing dated 5/22/17 for gross misconduct and misfeasance.
I second the motion.
We're going to take a roll call vote. Councilman Kranek?
Yes.
Councilman Bicker?
Yes.
Councilman Biassiata?
Yes.
Councilman Petro?
Yes.
Councilman Kukrow?
Yes.
Councilman Frondor?
Yes.
Councilman Traffus? Yes. Planning Commission member Thomas Jarris has been removed from the Planning Commission. Now I'm going to make a motion to approve Todd Hunt of Walter Haverfield to draft a conclusion of facts to support the decision of council for council's review and final approval.
I second the motion.
We're going to take a roll call vote. Councilman Kranek?
Yes.
Councilman Bicker?
Yes.
Councilman Biassiata?
Yes.
Councilman Petro?
Yes.
Councilman Kukrow?
Yes.
Councilman Frondor?
Yes.
Councilman Traffus? Yes. Now I'm going to make a motion to adjourn the removal hearing.
I second the motion.
Roll call vote. Councilman Kranek?
Yes.
Councilman Bicker?
Yes.
Councilman Biassiata?
Yes.
Councilman Petro?
Yes.
Councilman Kukrow?
Yes.
Councilman Frondor?
Yes.
Councilman Traffus? Yes. Thank you, everybody.
I just add that a request will be made to the council clerk to give notice of this decision by either, by some manner, directly or by Federal Express to Mr. Jaros.
Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned.
Mr. Hunt, I just want you to know that the court reporter will be preparing a transcript of this to speak with your
Oh, thank you.
findings of fact.
Thank you.